Have you ever thought it would be cool to see through a pot or pan as you cooked your food, like some sort of culinary X-ray vision? For almost every piece of cookware through the history of cookware, well, this was just a pipe dream. Until this came along. This is Visions, and you can see right through it. Visions was introduced over 40 years ago as cookware you could see through as you made your meal. Visions became extremely popular during the 1980s, then it all but fizzled out as quickly as it came. Today I'm going to tell you all about Visions cookware. I'm going to cook with it, and then I'll advise whether it's worth getting some for your kitchen. Let's take a look at and through some vintage Visions cookware. Hello and welcome to I Want to Cook. My name is Chef Matt, and today we are exploring Visions cookware. So what is this stuff? Visions was a product of Corning, specifically their French division, and it debuted in Europe in the late 1970s, where it was an immediate success. It rolled out in the US a few years later in the early 1980s, and here's fun fact number one. When it first arrived in the US, it was known as Leclerc due to some trademark issues. And here's fun fact number two. It was made in both France and at Corning's facilities here in America. Depending on the particular piece you have, it might say it was made in the USA or made in France. And actually, it is still made in France at one factory, but more on that later. Now, when Visions debuted over 4 decades ago, it joined other well-known Corning brands like Pyrex and Corningware, the latter of which I have made an entire video on. Now, if you watched my video on this stuff, Corningware, you know that it had been around since the 1950s, while this stuff, Pyrex, had been around even longer, since 1915. Now, both of those products were wildly successful, as was this stuff when it debuted in the 1980s. I mean, just look at it. It's new and exciting, and well, you can watch your food cook as you cook with it. And here's where you may be thinking, but what about Pyrex, Anchor Hawking, Fire King, and a slew of other glass cookware? You can see through that. Yes, but most of those pieces are designed for the oven, not for use on a stove or under a broiler. See, Visions was unique in that, like transparent Pyrex, you could monitor food as it cooked. But like Corningware, it was safe on the stove as well as under a broiler and was strong enough to withstand thermal shock. So like Corningware, Visions could go from freezer to stove or oven and vice versa. And it could also endure super high temperatures. In fact, in one advertisement at the time, it showed a Visions pot literally cooking another pot of metal inside of it and just melting it down. It could withstand that high of heat. Visions was made of a glass ceramic material similar to Corningware. In fact, you can kind of think of Visions as a translucent Corningware. And like Corningware, Visions is also microwave safe, and it's great for storing food in the refrigerator. Perhaps even better because, well, you can see what's inside of it. Now, as I said, this all led to initial success of Visions cookware. It was in a lot of households in the 1980s and into the 1990s. But almost as soon as it arrived, well, sales began to fizzle. Corning's investments in Visions, including a factory in Brazil to make the stuff, just didn't seem to pay off. And a few years later, Corning would go on to sell its entire consumer division to another company. Now, unlike Corningware, which came in a wide variety of pieces, most Visions were pots, although there were some pans like this, and Visions did experiment with different things, like this cranberry color that came about in the early 1990s, and there were even some non-stick coated Visions pieces, which I've never tried and I probably don't want to. Okay, so what is this stuff like to actually cook with? Well, while Visions looks cool, I think in reality, it just isn't the best to cook with, especially compared to metal. It just doesn't conduct heat as well. And to be honest with you, when I'm cooking, most of the time I will just grab a metal pot or pan. And something to note is that like Corningware, this will not work on an induction range. It can work on gas, it can work on electric, but it's a no-go on induction because you need a ferrous magnetic material to work on an induction stove, and well, this isn't it. I find Visions cookware is at its best with liquid applications. Things like soup, maybe making some oatmeal or rice, or as a double boiler. I found it is really good in that application, which you might remember from the double boiler episode, where we were able to see the water just come to a simmer. That is a perfect application for a Visions cookware because you can really monitor that water and make sure it's not getting too hot. I find Visions is at its worst with dry heat cooking, like searing in a skillet. So for example, I took 2 pieces of chicken and I cooked one in my all-clad pan and the other in my Visions skillet. And well, the results weren't great for the one cooked in the Visions skillet. While both pieces of chicken were ultimately tasty, the one cooked in the all-clad metal pan had better browning and visual appeal. And then there's the issue of making a pan sauce in the Visions cookware. While I could clearly see how my pan sauce was developing in the metal pan, the translucity of the Visions pan, well, it worked against it because I couldn't really see the colors develop as I made that sauce in the Visions pan. So that's another demerit for it. I should also mention how these things are to clean. Now, the pots clean up quite easily if you just cook a liquid application in them, but boy, this pan, this was an absolute bear to clean after I cooked that chicken. I had to scrub and scrub and scrub to get those black marks off. So where does that leave us, and where does that leave my recommendation for you with Visions cookware? Well, first of all, if you have an induction stove, again, it's not going to work for you. But if you have gas or electric, it is interesting stuff and it is pretty neat, especially if you cook soups or something like that, maybe pasta, rice, where you want to see things actually cook. But in reality, I have far more Corningware and metal cookware than I do Visions. I have this stuff and it's interesting, but I don't use it a whole lot. Now you might be wondering, where do you buy this stuff? Well, I buy mine the same place I buy my vintage Corningware, and that's at the thrift shop. Now, Visions is not nearly as popular as Corningware. Remember, there was like 750 million pieces of Corningware made, and I don't think there was nearly that many of these Visions cookware. But they can be found at thrift shops, and they're usually not that expensive, maybe $10 to $20. Perhaps more interesting though is that this stuff is still being made. Yes, there is a factory in France, and I believe one in Japan as well, that is actually still producing this cookware. I think this does have quite a following overseas and not so much here in America. So if you really are curious about this and you want brand new Visions, know that it is still available. But as for me, I just buy this stuff occasionally at the thrift store because it really is unique. So there you go. There's a little Visions Cookware 101. I hope you found this interesting, and I'm curious, have you ever used this stuff? Do you want to use this? Maybe you have memories of this stuff growing up. Please let me know in the comments below. Okay, trivia time. Last week I asked you to identify this strange looking device and several of you got it right. It is indeed a knife sharpening / honer. This is Bavarian Edge. I bought this at the thrift store just because I thought it was so unique looking and worth trying. I personally haven't had a whole lot of success with this. I use other methods to sharpen my knives, like a whetstone and a dedicated grinder, and I am planning on making an entire video on knife sharpening, but that's what this is. It is a knife sharpener / honing system. For this week's culinary trivia, we are headed back to the produce aisle, and what in the world are these things? A hint, they are not horns. I mean, I guess they could be for a culinary Halloween, but no, they're not horns. If you know what these are or you have a guess, put it in the comments below. I will, of course, let you know what they are in the next episode, probably after I cook them, maybe in some Visions cookware. Hey, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, then you definitely need to watch my video on Corningware, and I'm gonna put that right there. Be sure to check that out. Until then, I'll see you next time.